So thank you guys for joining us today for our first webinar of 2022 for the Coffee and Careers in Animal Science webinar series. So today we're going to be talking about working internationally. And we have two guests with us today, Rob Payne with Cargill Animal Nutrition, North America, and Marcos, I'm going to butcher your last name, so
Rostagno.
Rostagno with Phytobiotics. So I will go ahead and let them do a brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Go ahead, Rob. You want to take a lead?
Sure, I guess so. So hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name's Rob Payne. I'm the head of poultry nutrition for Cargill Animal Nutrition. I've been out in the industry about 20 or so years now. I grew up in Smyrna, Tennessee, just southeast of Nashville. Did my undergrad at Middle Tennessee State University, and then moved to Baton Rouge to go to grad school at LSU. Originally from a master's, and stayed for my PhD as well. I'm a non-ruminant nutritionist by training. For about the first 13 years of my career, I was with Evonik Feed Additives in a variety of roles. And the very first role, which is part of why I'm here today, was my very first job out was as an animal researcher, but that was based in Hanau, Germany. And so right out of the gate, got a lot of international exposure, but was with Evonik in a number of roles that took me internationally to Germany, and then back here to the States for a number of years, and then back overseas to Asia for a few years, and then back here into global roles where I traveled extensively all over the world. Left Evonik in 2017 and joined Elanco for a couple of years. That's where Marcos and our paths crossed initially, I think. And there I was the global head of marketing and nutrition for the nutritional health business of Elanco. And then in 2019, I moved over here to Cargill, and today I'm responsible for consulting nutrition for our feed and premix businesses here in North America. So.
Good. So a little bit about myself. I think my whole life has been kind of an international experience or journey. I grew up in Latin America. I started my career, I'm a veterinarian by training, always focused on swine and poultry my whole life. Started my career in Brazil, consulting, then started as a faculty in a university down there. Heavily focused on preventive veterinary medicine, so infectious disease, but always dabbling into gut health. There's always something related to this. And working with both, as in Brazil, particularly the large producers, they always have both swine and poultry. So I kind of always had to juggle both. And the way of thinking is very similar. After a while, I decided to pursue a PhD. That's when I came to the US. Did it at Iowa State. And back then, the opportunity was a big push for food safety. And that's where I started focusing on salmonella. I did a lot of work on ecology and epidemiology of salmonella, and that kind of, I tell people that's kind of my curse. Even after many years, after a while, I kind of detach from salmonella, and every couple of years it comes back, and they drag me back to the salmonella world, and they ask questions. They ask me to present something or work on this. Did a lot of consulting in this area for many companies. Then after 20 some years in academia, I was a researcher also for USDA for a while. that I was doing a lot of independent consultant. That's when I moved to Elenco from 2013 to 2018, 5 years, always in global roles. And so traveling a lot, covering both swine and poultry, a lot of Latin America, a lot of Asia, a little bit of Europe as well. And that's when, as Rob mentioned, our paths crossed more towards the end of my time there. And that's when I moved to late 2018. I left Elenco for a couple of large consultants, Salmonella again. And after that, came after about 6 months, came to Phytobiotics to help them build the business in the US, focusing on tech service. And now they're just this year, I'm helping them build the technical marketing area for the US here. I'm also still focusing on swine and poultry, covering both areas. So besides that, my family is originally from Argentina, but I grew up in Brazil, so always moving back and forth and traveling. So that's where my background comes from, and working all over the world.
Well, that is a good introduction of both of you. Today's topic is about working internationally. And I remember I met Rob early in his, I think, both our careers, I could say. And then I heard the next thing I knew, Rob moved to Singapore. And then also Marco's, like, you've been all over the world. Can you discuss what it's like to move to different countries or and how that you and what you have to make with your career and family, kind of balancing those types of moves?
Yeah, sure. I'll get started for a couple minutes, Rob, but feel free to jump in, or later on you can complement. Okay. And so it's challenging. It has its challenges. It's a mixed reaction, right? At the beginning, when you get an offer or an opportunity, you get excited. Then when it starts happening, you kind of get a little bit of the chills, or right, the stress of the unknown. What are you going to do? Depending on where you are, particularly when it's a big change. For, let's say, you're going from the east to Asia, whole different culture, languages, all that kind of things. You're going to get a little bit stressed, and you're going to get a little unsure what's going to happen. In my case, I started earlier, as I said, as a family, but then my career as well was more with family. I already had kids, young kids, when I moved to the US and I started a career again and everything. It's complicated. There are a lot of factors that play. You have to, of course, the type of work depends. If it's going to be permanent, if you're taking a job and you're going to stay there and you don't know for how long, it may take years, or maybe some months only, and then you switch, you move. All that plays because there are a lot of factors around it, right? The legalities, the visas, documentations, everything. If you have a spouse, is he or she going to be able to work? Well, depending on what visa they have, there is, if you have kids, is school. All these affects your decision and your experience there as well. It can be, everything can go smoothly if you have a big company that is a sponsor everything, it sets up everything, but it can create also a lot of stress, and it may affect your performance as a professional because you get distracted with all this. Professionally, it is challenging, but definitely, as people ask me, do you think it's worth it? I say, definitely it is, right? You will learn a lot from different technical views or different ways of working, how business operate, even if it's the same company. Sometimes being in Asia or being in Europe or US, the company operates different. The routines, the day-to-day activities are different. The culture is different, and you have to adapt to those cultures as well. In our role, and Rob can correct me based on his experience, but particularly, at least most of my time, I deal with customers. Well, then the cultural part plays a big role. You have to know how to approach people. They are different in US and Latin America and Europe and Asia. How you talk to them, how you, from the moment you introduce yourself until what kind of topics they want to discuss may change. The priorities in the swine industry in the US may be different somewhere else. They might, especially in my case, that I deal with a lot of disease. What is a big issue here may not be in another place. So sometimes you get that surprise. Right? You get there and they say they want to talk to something completely different that you had in mind. But it's definitely a great experience, and you will learn a lot, and you develop a huge network of people that you make friends with. You work with, you get close, you used to travel together, you used to spend time and days in hotels and other places together, and you develop those connections. So I'll let Rob expand a little bit more on those.
Yeah, I'm not sure what all I can expand on. I can certainly agree with almost everything you said there, Marcos. For me, I really thought a kid living in Tennessee, never left Tennessee, and it probably typifies a lot of, particularly people who grew up in the U.S. And go to school. When I moved to Louisiana, that was already an expat assignment, so the culture was so different already. I got a taste of a little bit what that was like, but even that couldn't prepare me for what I was about to go out on. And in my case, finishing my PhD, I wanted a job, and the job that was out there and available to me required me to move to Germany, and so that was scary as hell, to be honest, because I outside of going to Tennessee and Louisiana, I really had never been anywhere else besides Des Moines for Midwest wine. I was pretty ignorant at that point. The one thing the pros, if you're willing to make that jump, as scary as it is, and I moved to Germany, and at that point in time where I lived in Germany, no one spoke English. My German was very bad to begin with, so it definitely had its days, right? They had different processes. They did things different ways. But despite all that, the perspective that you gain, the opportunity to see how things are done in other places and still done successfully, but maybe in ways that either we wouldn't necessarily approach them here, or in ways that maybe we don't agree with. From a working perspective, to gain that perspective, but also to gain the perspective of living in a different culture and having to figure out how to live in that culture. It's truly, I probably grew more that first year in Germany, than I ever have in my career as a person. Learning to deal with other cultures, learning to for the first time ever, I was the stranger in a new land, and so it's quite enlightening. And then on top of that, of course, professionally, it's very, very rewarding. Because you do get to travel to all these different countries and see how production is done. You get to work with swine and poultry producers, or cattle producers, or aqua producers, things you never would have imagined getting the chance to do. And yeah, as Marco said, sometimes you'll go to a customer over there in one of those faraway places, be it India or Burma or wherever, and you think you're going in to talk about amino acids, and instead they want to talk about investments in the U.S. market. Where could they have money, and they want to make investments. And of course, I didn't know anything about that, but it's just, you never knew what you were going to walk into. I think what makes it possible, and back to your question, I think what makes it most possible is to have a support of your family, whether that's your wife or your girlfriend or your partner and your children. If they're open to the adventure, then it makes it all possible. That's what I have to say. My wife was a major impetus for me. She was extremely supportive of these moves. She understood what it could lead to professionally. And so I think without that support system, it can get really tough over in those faraway places. So.
Yeah, I usually ask my wife, how crazy are you to be with me until today, with after so many moves and travels and time being gone. And I really admire her. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here at all.
Absolutely. And think about I can't tell who all's on the call, but when I moved to Germany, Skype didn't exist. FaceTime didn't exist. The way you called home was you got a calling card, and maybe you got it cost $20-$30, and maybe that got you 5 minutes of talk time. But there was no voice over IP protocols were just beginning. Skype actually released while I was living in Germany. Those types of things. Then fast forward to when I lived in Singapore, being able to be on FaceTime and for my parents to be able to see our newborn son that was born in Singapore, that took the world from being 15,000 miles, 20,000 miles away from each other to being 2 miles away. So technology changes it tremendously, and for the good, I have to say.
I would say that I would agree completely with that, because when I came to the US to study, it was only phones. And I would buy phones to call home, and they were kind of expensive in the beginning. Then I found one that was cheaper. But it was hard because you don't see your family. You don't see your family.
Yeah.
And it is really hard. We have also other people, Casey and Marissa, that also lived outside of the US. I know that Regina has lived out of the US, and Janet Remus also. So they may talk a little bit about that too.
Well, I was just going to say, jump on in.
I was listening to everything and smiling because that has been my experience as well. So Marcos, a lot of Brazilians here. I'm Brazilian as well, and I've been in the US now for 10 years, but it's such a major decision, right? When I came, I was lucky enough to come as an expat with a big company. So the whole experience is minimized by that support that you have along. But even so, I can only imagine how it looks like to do that on your own, because there's just so much to be taken care of. It's thrilling. At the beginning, you get the offer and you think, okay, this is going to be a big family adventure. You get all the support. And then for me, the moment that it really hit me really hard, the butterflies in my stomach, was the moment when this big giant truck with a container turned around the corner of my house. And that was it, right? There was no turning back. We were moving. So it was very scary. So I moved. I had 2 young children. My youngest one had just turned 1. We didn't have the chance of unwrapping the birthday gifts or everything. We just put everything in that container and move over, right? And it was supposed to be a temporary thing. Turned out it wasn't, right? It became permanent. And I remember before I moved, one of the sponsors, he was a vice president with DuPont at the time, and he was sharing with me his experience. He was American and he had lived in Asia for several years. And before I came and I was pondering over the opportunity, he said, listen, I'm going to describe to you how this works. And it was almost like a normal curve, right? So there is a period of time. First is the excitement. You get super excited. The first year, you're going to go see places, you're going to travel. It's almost like you're in a big adventure, and it's going to sound all thrilling. It's wonderful. Second year, you kind of settle down, and then third year really hits you, because that's when you get homesick. Everything is become new normal in this new place, and you have to find your way out of this. So be prepared. There's going to be a cycle just like that. And I always remember his words as I went through that cycle, right? So the first year, every weekend was a different adventure. We're going on, just day trips and going all over the place with the family. And then at some point, you're just like, okay, this is strange. It's a strange place, different people, different culture. And it takes a while to absorb all of that. And after some time, after a while, you kind of realize that you become a citizen of the world, and there is no real home anymore, right? So you're here and you miss things from there. You're there, you miss things from here. in whatever you are, you're always going to be this person who you've expanded your horizon in such a way that it's just hard to fit in one way or the other, right? But I wouldn't trade that for anything. I think it's a super valid experience for anybody who has the chance. The big positives is just getting to know different cultures, working in different ways. There's no way you can learn those things just staying in the same comfort zone that you are. You're going to be stretching yourself. It is super uncomfortable at many times. It's painful, but it's worth it, right? I wouldn't do it any other way. It's as far as a family, you touched a very important point there. It's very hard for whoever is accompanying you. It's harder even than for the person who's at work because you usually are very busy, right? So you have a lot to do, a lot to be worried about. But your support system is the one who's really feeling it. They need to spend a lot of time to take care of the home and the children and settle down and figure out the most basic things. Where do we go for bread, right? Where do we get milk for breakfast? Those things you cannot take for granted, right? Different language, different places. Remember being at a grocery store and asking random people for help, or where can I find this, right? It's hard to describe just a number of things that they have to take care of, right? Finding a new primary physician, right? All kinds of things that you have all settled down, you take for granted. You start from scratch. You're nobody. You have no history. Whatever credibility you have built, around professionally or personally, you start from ground zero. It's fascinating. It's a wonderful experience. But yeah, you have to be prepared to go through all of that as you go through this.
And I would add one other thing that when I came for graduate school, so I lived in the US for almost 5.5 years, but as a graduate student. Then I went back to Brazil, and then I was invited to come and work here. So when I came back, I would tell you that it took me about 2 years to get used to the life here. And I came by myself to get used to the life here, to understand how things worked. Because Americans will think, oh, everything is the same. There is no problem. It's like, no, it is not. It is not the same. So I would say to people, it's like, okay, explain to me like I am a 6 years old, because I didn't live with this all my life. So explain to me in a very simple way so I'll understand where I have to go.
Yeah, we are animals, right? So we get used, we get into our comfort zones. And even if you say, oh, I lived there, I grew up in a messy country. Yeah, but you get used to it. And so once you change everything you knew or how to do it, where to go, all this, it's kind of, you feel lost. I had for me, the shock was exactly on that transition. I came for grad school or with wife, 2 kids, broke, living on an assistantship, right? So, okay, but it was temporary. In our mind, my wife did not speak a single word in English. She had never left Brazil, when not neither her or anyone in her family. And so she was scared as hell. But we knew it was temporary. Okay, and we're here for 3-4 years, we do it, and then we go back. Well, when we got to the end of it, I got a job offer. And then the decision all of a sudden, wait a minute, are we going back or not? And that was a big shock. Now we have to make this decision. Back when, as Rob was describing, back then was all on the phone. And they say, then you start questioning, we're going to leave the family and all the connections we have, what's going to happen. And fast forward, it's been 22 years and we are here. And so you take risks, but your family, all this, it's very important to. But what I feel, I don't know if it's for me, because the way I grew up and the mix that already was in my family from Argentina, raised in Brazil, now living in the US, working in many different countries. There is a time in my life where I kind of lost my identity regarding where are you from. You kind of detach from that. You said, well, I am here, but I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I may change. And of course, it gets harder as you get older and your kids grow. And then you start questioning, well, do I want to live or not? Do I want to stay, be close? But those are steps or phases in life.
Well, we have several members in the audience today. Do we have any questions from our audience, or I'm going to switch gears if there's no questions yet?
I actually have one question. Hi, Casey. It's Rebecca.
Hey,
For our speakers on here, international, you took a risk. You took a risk to kind of experience a new culture, and you saw different cultures within the segments that you went to, poultry, swine, beef, whatever it might be. Now, since you had that experience, and sometimes we know European cultures or some other places, things come down the pipeline where it might have an effect here in US production. We also know that US production is very efficient. So through all of your career, have you seen anything come down the pipeline or starting to that could affect our industry, and or vice versa? Maybe we've done things very well here and you're now seeing it being implemented somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll speak from the animal nutrition perspective. Marco can speak from the animal health side. Maybe, I was fortunate to be in Europe at a time when they were really embracing enzymes, and enzymes were on the front edge of things. And there was always this feeling, even when I was in grad school, that European nutritionists were a little more progressive and this and that. It was really great to be over there and be in the melting pot, let's say, of the antibiotic withdrawal and everything going on, to really be able to understand firsthand the whys they were having to do this, and the steps that they didn't get the grace period maybe that we got as far as an adoption to NAE or something like that. And as a result, it was ugly and herky-jerky, and there was decisions made that probably now they would go back and look at and say, gosh, wish we could have changed that, wish we would have had more time. But it was a light switch moment. To be able to see that and participate that and help put that in perspective when talking to producers over here was really, really, really great. On the other hand, when I went to Asia and I was working with Asian producers, at that point in time, those guys were growing anywhere from 10 to 30% per year, year over year. They were popping up feed mills like Pez. They're just, animal producing was exploding in Indonesia, in India, in Vietnam, all over. And the problems that they were dealing with were all stuff that, and for the most part, their integrated model is very similar to ours. But they were dealing with things that we had dealt with and that we learned about when we were in school. So it was great to be able to go over there and be a resource to those guys and help them maybe think about some things about how to control variation or how to improve meal uniformity, and the impact that was going to have downstream on the animals. That you might have said, well, that's just basic animal science. The U.S. mastered that in 1985 or something. You could say it like that, and that's very true. But without having that knowledge, and that's one of the areas where we really excel in particular. Having that knowledge and being able to take it and share it was extremely great. So I had the fortune of learning, and then add in the Brazilian. I learned a lot about raw material variation when I started really studying all the different nations producing soybean meal and the various ingredients, understanding why they produce this way or that way, understanding processor differences, these things. So again, you were able to use that in one or the other situation, and it helped because here in the U.S., for example, we're very blessed. We largely use U.S. soybean meal, and it's a pretty consistent product. But over in other parts of the world, Europe's a net importer of bean meal. China's today still a net importer of beans. And those don't come, they come from Argentina, they come from Brazil, they come from India. So they're very different looking beans than what I was used to. So being able to use our knowledge here and take that was another great experience.
Yeah, so yeah, and along the same lines, but that Rob said, but more on the health side, I could just reaffirming what Rob said. I still firmly believe, and I still firmly believe that the Americas, North and Latin America, are still and will be the ones providing most of this pork and poultry and things like this, because of all the access to the soybeans, the corn, and everything like that. But it is a global industry. It is influenced in different directions because, just as an example, you mentioned in the question efficiency, right? We are very efficient in US, and I will challenge that and say efficiency is a relative term. It depends what you use to measure that efficiency. How is your industry designed? What your industry or your market values in that space, on that product? And we see differences in that, and between US and Brazil or Europe and so forth. Now, things change, and I used to joke especially when I talk to younger folks and they ask me about the industry. I say, well, our generation, we are directly or indirectly working to supply Asia. Right? I don't see them supplying or being able to produce what they consume. So directly or indirectly, they affect the world. If they buy more, they consume more, whatever, they shift, it will affect. So you have to think globally. So that applies to the work in international. Even if you're not physically in another country, you have to have this global view in our field. I truly believe this. It goes from basics, and I'm not a nutritionist, but you see what Rob says. You just mentioned corn and soybean, and you affect the whole production system, your cost and everything there. But then in my space, it's even worse. You have disease. Look at African swine fever. Look at avian influenza, right? These things have huge implications. I've lived through this pipeline or influence that comes from the outside since I came to the US. Remember, as I mentioned, when I came to do my PhD was in epidemiology with salmonella. Salmonella was a big thing. It was basically being pushed from Europe. It was basically Denmark. They was pushing for salmonella. And I remember with the research groups that we had here and there, I was in the mix of Iowa State and NADC there. We had a lab there, so we would interact a lot with Europeans, and they were basically pushing this. Basically, they were trying to differentiate their product in the market, and all of a sudden, US started paying attention to that too. The second round that I went through that, it's what the poultry industry did very well, moved quickly. Swine industry is still trying to figure it out, is the antibiotics. I went through the exact same thing. Europe started pushing that, and for a long time, everybody's saying, well, these guys are crazy. This is not going to happen. You're going to kill the industry. Guess what? We are going through it now. The poultry industry in the US showed how quickly it can adapt, how quickly it can change. All right? There are consequences in my field, of course, disease and issues and gut health, all this stuff. But there are more, and we are hearing about in the nutritional space. We're talking about restricting some minerals, right? The amount of zinc oxide, and we are all talking about this. It started in Europe. It's coming down the line. We are talking about animal welfare, how you house these animals, where you keep them. So it's a global system. You may not be happening where you are right now, but you have to be alert. You have to know what is going on in other areas of the world, because it has the potential to come down the pipeline and affect wherever you are, here, Brazil, Asia, Europe, and so forth. So it is important, and it's just the cycles. It happens.
I have a question for, I don't know if to be, I think Marcos and Rob also. when you think about disease and you move from a country to another, and you know that the systems might be very, very different in terms of technology, in terms of how they are created, the size of the system, how does that impact health and life of these animals?
A lot. That's why you have different disease popping up, but once these bugs develop and adapt, they can spread. And the transit of people all over the world today is incredible. In less than 24 hours, you can go around the world. So you can carry that. And for my case, since I was doing a lot of tech support, and of course, because of being a vet, I was heavily focused on health and was working for an animal health company. And so we visit a lot of these large companies and farms. I had to be very, very careful because I didn't want myself being the one transmitting those things. So you have to be very, very careful, and it changes completely the dynamics. You see how they are building farms, swine farms in China or some other countries in Asia that I visited, those multi-level stack farms. It's unbelievable the density of animals they have in those places. Now they're learning, of course. I know, I'm pretty sure has been just a few years that I'm not there, but I'm sure it changed because during the time I was visiting there, you can see how they adapt and they start changing the systems, right? But new disease will come up, or disease that we don't even know they exist yet. And so I do believe there is a difference. And there are some diseases that for one reason or the other don't happen in other countries, right? For you compare US system with swine production in Brazil, they're very similar. Genetics is very similar. The type of nutrition is very similar, right? Why there are some disease, there are a nightmare here, appears is a nightmare here in US. In Brazil, yeah, maybe, or some places don't even have it. They don't go explain it. How? I don't know. Facilities, regional distribution of farms, I don't know. Or you talk about, in my case, salmonella, right? In poultry especially. We have entire regions in Brazil dominated by a specific serotype of salmonella in poultry. And they completely independent companies, completely independent production and process systems, and they can't figure out how this thing is spreading and dominating so much. And the same thing, yeah, even though we have some serotypes dominating here, are not even the same as are dominating there. Why? We don't know. But I truly believe that, yeah, you have the environment, you have the farm, the production system, and things like that will affect the disease part of it.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely. From my perspective, what was interesting and what changed as I worked with producers in the different production styles, types, open barns, closed barns, whatever the case was, in animal intensity, etc. My consult, my advice had to change. Here I was often talking, or in Europe was often talking about optimizing nutrition and the latest amino acid requirements, or what we understood about low protein, or whatever the case was. As I would go to other places and see other production facilities and understand their disease challenge or understand their biosecurity challenge, some days it was very much you were going back to some of your undergraduate animal science type courses, and you were teaching, I was coaching those customers on the basics of biosecurity, why a foot bath is important, what it can help do. Things as simple as that, the things that you might go, well, that's elementary. But in fact, it's not in a lot of places. Now, that I don't want to paint such a broad brush, because within a given customer, if they're exporting meat, they can have facilities that rival anything you've ever seen, the best in the world. And then on the other hand, if it's a local production, so they're going to sell the meat locally or in the wet markets, it could be as basic as you've ever seen in the world. And that could be within the same producer. So helping them understand what the pressures that each of those types of production presented, and sometimes not even talking about, understanding that, hey, optimizing nutrition, that's not the topic we need to be talking about right now, because it doesn't matter, I can have the best nutrition in the world, but they've got such a disease challenge, the animal's never going to benefit from it. We've got some more basic things we have to work on. That was really helpful, and it was really enlightening to see, because unlike Marcos, having grown up in the U.S., I probably had some blinders on for a big chunk of my life until getting exposed to some of that.
I have a question. Anyway, so my name is Musa Mutari. I'm a graduate student at Kansas State University, Department of Animal Science. So, as Dr. Marco stated, he's been an international student. I know there are a number of international, folks that were once upon a time international, students, graduate students here at K-State. I just want to understand from your perspective, or maybe from your experience, some of the things, challenges you had to go through, for instance, after finishing with your graduate programs, the fact that you applied for jobs. What are some of the challenges, and how were you able to actually successfully go through this? Because right now, as a graduate student, you finish, particularly an international, you have to apply for OPT, and then hoping that you get a job, or you actually land a job that would sponsor you subsequently. What are some of the things that you actually went through with your experience, and what are some advice that you share with us or with me? Thank you.
Yeah. I'll share perspective, because I think that's probably the easier one, frankly. In my experience, what I've seen, and what I also felt whenever I was going through grad school, was that, I'm in grad school at a U.S. university. I really was pretty ignorant to anything else around the world, minimal exposure. In my mind, I'm going to finish grad school and I'm going to get a job in the U.S., and that's going to be that, and I think that's probably still today the mindset of particularly U.S.-based grad students or kids who are from the U.S. I would say that's a really, really naive mindset to have. And I was naive to have that at the time. When I finished grad school, I think the year I finished, there were 5 or 6 of us all coming out at the same time. 2 of us at LSU and 2 or 3 at K-State. And we were all competing for the same jobs. And the problem was there were 2 jobs. One was with Evonik and one was with Cargill. So 5 people can't fit into 2 jobs very well. It turned out Cargill ended up having a few more, but that immediately opened my eyes to, well, this fairy tale that I thought I was going to just go to work for a U.S. company and work in the U.S. and blah, blah, blah. That had to go out the window, because Evonik made it very clear, DeGusa at the time made it very clear that, hey, you're going to come to work for us, you're moving to Germany. And yeah, eventually you'll come back to the U.S. Like that. So for me, I had to get into the mindset, do I want a job or not? And of course I wanted a job. So you do what you have to do. I think what I learned from that, and what I would encourage anyone who's in grad school today, whether they originate from the U.S. or originate from anywhere else in the world, is that recognize that you, as Marcos mentioned a few minutes ago, you are planning to work in a global industry. Animal production is a global industry, more so today than ever before. Even if the meat's produced here, it's probably going to be consumed somewhere else. And so take that to heart and go ahead and get your mind wrapped around the idea that to be open to jobs no matter where in the world they are. I have a good friend of mine who, when he finished his PhD, he was here in the U.S. for a few years. Then he took a job in Egypt, and he was in Egypt for almost 10 years. Basically disappeared off the map because at that time there was definitely no Skype or anything like that. But that took quite a leap of faith for him, and to have others who took jobs in Thailand and today still live in China. But you have to be open to those opportunities because it's just a question of, do you want a job or not? And hopefully you find one where it's in a place where you want it to be, but you need to be open to the idea that it could be anywhere in the world, and any of those places present opportunity and excitement.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is a little bit of the other layer, and not only from being a little bit in your shoes, and as well, when I was in academia for many years, I had a lot of international students that came to grad studies with us and then decided to find for a job or something. Is number one thing you have to understand is what Rob said. It's a competitive market, and it will continue. It is increasing. That competitiveness is increasing, right? You see a lot of people in these schools, and everybody now needs an additional degree and PhD, a postdoc, and all that. So first step is decide what you want to do with your life. What kind of work industry or area you want to work for. Then the next step for you is really get to know the system. Don't fall in that trap thinking, well, someone is going to come and offer me a job. That's betting on luck, right? You have to figure it out. Okay, I have to apply. What's the best way to apply for a job? In your case, that's why I'm saying, because I've been in your shoes, being someone coming from another culture, how does the job market or the application processes work in the US for industry, academia, whatever, right? That's very, very important for you to learn what is going to take. Be very patient, but at the same time, very, very resilient. You will pursue, you will be tested. You will have a lot of pressure and days that you're going to think, well, I think I'm going to go back. I'm going to pack my stuff and take off and go back home, right? But so you have to be very, very, very determined what you want to do. And probably the most important one of all these that's going to help you understand everything that I was just telling is exactly what you're doing now. Network, network, network. The more people just you're doing here, just being here, listening, getting to know people, going to events, interacting with all your colleagues in your school, or going to the meetings and getting to know grad students from other schools and other areas, that is valuable beyond any comprehension you can have. This is the group, these are the people that you will interact, you're going to talk to, or someone will remember you, someone will see you in whatever company you're applying for a job, or you need to be there, you need to be in their mind. So networking is very, very important for you. So those will be kind of the key advices that I will give it to you. Don't shy away. Don't just think, oh, I'm going to focus on my studies and I'm going to go deep. No, network, get to know people, put yourself out there and get to know the system.
One other thing that I would say is not only being resilient, but be very persistent. One thing that I've seen some students do today, even if they are doing a postdoc somewhere or doing some continuous study somewhere, some people are even thinking about applying for their own resident card wherever they are, because they don't know if they will find someone that they're going to support them to go anywhere. So if by any chance they are able to get the resident card, then they are able to apply to any job. So I think talking to other students and seeing what is their experience, that might help. a lot. Students from other schools also.
And can I add to that? Because through this program, I've had the opportunity to interact and meet and help a lot of international students. And so one of my things I have been doing, because the US visa program is awful right now. There's not a good system that we have. And COVID's changed a lot, where Rob was talking about competition. Some of these roles, your competition's all over the world. It's not just here in the US or a Kansas State competition that you're graduating with a pool of candidates. And I think a good thing that came out of here, this is global. So if you can't stay in the US and work in the US, but you want to come back, I think Rob's experience when he went with Evonik and moved to Germany, and then he moved to Singapore and he's back in the US now, was a way to get back. Like he said, his friend, 10 years in Egypt. That is finding a company who has a global market presence. And so they may have a role over in Singapore or in Europe or somewhere else. If you qualify for that, apply for that, get into that company, and usually, you can make it in your professional development plan, your career journey plan with that company to say, hey, I'd like to come back in the US sometime. If there's a position open, let me know. But a lot of times it's easier if you're already working for a company for them to have an internal hire and transfer you to a different country where you may want to go instead. So that's also important. The other thing is, Marco said it, network. If you have somebody in that company pushing your resume through, it doesn't matter if you're an international student or a domestic student, that's going to be so important. And that's hopefully what Coffee and Careers is, getting involved with the people out here. We will put you in touch with a speaker or a mentor. That's what a lot of us are here today, to help students like you and to reach out. But I see a lot of students, and it's not even just international, but even domestic, that stay in their little clique, don't connect with different universities, different professors, different industries to gain those experiences. And then they're looking, how do I get a job? Well, they don't stand out because they never also tried their, professional career of that nation to stand out, to be known differently. So as Marco said it the best. So some of my advice.
Casey, one other thing that I would mention is that any professional that is working in this market or any other market, there will be people looking for other people to work, or for you to work for them, or whatever it is, that will contact you. And what I receive sometimes, that people call me or make a contact with me to look for someone to work. It's like, I'm not interested, but I know some people. So I'll give them some names and then they will make their contacts. So keep in touch, keep the network working, because that's going to help you eventually.
Yeah, Casey, I'll kind of add to this because I did a little bit of this when I was in graduate school. We had our graduate student organization, and we put on what we called a biotech symposium. So we invited the people that worked in industry and research. And then we had them come and we did a panel discussion with the current graduate students. And then we also invited some graduate students that have been out in the field in industry, just to kind of keep it more industry focused for those looking for positions after school outside of academia. And one of the biggest takeaways there was sometimes you're not connected to the right person, but they know who you should talk to. So now, when you're going to a trade show, it's hard because they send certain people, maybe people in marketing, maybe people that are sales reps. Those may not be the technical people you want to connect with for a technical position, but they might know those people. So definitely stay in touch and be persistent. It's hard. It really is. But if anyone can do it, it's a graduate student because we're resilient. And be open to opportunity. I took a position with a very small company I'd never heard of because I had found out about the position from somebody else. They weren't actively advertising it on primary places you would think to look for positions. So I actually And that was through someone I knew. They were like, hey, this kind of sounds like something you might be interested in. And so oddly enough, like my degree is in animal science and immunology, and I now work as an animal nutritionist. So it plays more into my background. I've done animal nutrition in the past, and I did have a nutrition focused project. But it wasn't something that I was like, say I put a job search in for animal nutritionist. That wasn't necessarily something I was, keeping an eye out for. So just being open in that regard too, because, originally I was like, oh, I'm going to go work for an animal health company. Well, reality, there's really only 4 that you can work for and they weren't hiring at the time. But it's been a great opportunity so far. Also, we're a global company. So kind of going back to this conversation that we've been having, but I travel for work. Well, not in the last year, but I'm getting to travel more. And that includes abroad. So going to other countries and having experiences there, meeting with our customers in other places. It's been incredibly insightful. And then you also make connections other places. So you never know what road you'll end up taking, but just keep an open mind and be persistent and ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask, say, hey, I know you work in marketing, but I'm really, interested in this company and learning more from someone on your technical side. Could you make that connection for me? Here's my information. It can be just something as simple as that, a little elevator pitch that you have prepared, especially if you're going to, say, a trade show where they're going to be talking to lots of people. Just a good way to kind of stand out in their mind, just come up with, say, like a 15-second elevator pitch and go that way. But really, that was one of the most important takeaways from this symposium, was just that the importance of networking, because it's not something that you talk about in graduate school. It's not something you get trained on in graduate school. It's something you really have to kind of do yourself and learn how to do it yourself. But it does make all the difference in the end.
Any last minute questions?
Yeah. One thing that I will say is, like, be happy because you have networking now. When I finished school, it was a long, long time ago. Nothing of this existed. So be happy.
Last minute question. Yep. Well, I do have one last minute question. We're running out of time, but it's really good if we could, different cultures. Have you ever felt not accepted, discriminated against traveling or working internationally because you were of a different nationality? Do you have any issues of that? That was one of the questions I had come through the chat.
I would say yes. Maybe not openly, but you can tell when someone is dismissing you or what you say. It is human nature, and there is no way around it. And it happens everywhere. It's not just in one place or the other. It depends where you are and the cultural level of the individuals you're talking to or where you are. But yes, it happens. And you have to get used to it. You're not going to change the world. You're not going to change human nature. So at some point, some places, you will feel it. Everybody does.
I would say that I treat as most of the time as a joke. So when people, if I'm talking, depending on what I'm talking, they are going to get my accent, that I have a different accent. So they will ask me, oh, where are you from? It's like, what? Are you confusing my beautiful accent with somebody else's? Which is a small city here in North Carolina that has a horrible accent. So there you go.
But add to that, I think it's right. I mean, there are unconscious biases no matter what, where we go, right? So whenever you are different for whatever reason, people will judge. We do, right? We all do. There's nothing, it's just human nature, as Marco was saying. It's just the way it is. And you definitely have to prove yourself more in those situations, because if people just distrust you for whatever reason, you're not known, then it just takes more time, right? It takes more time. But ultimately, I think my experience and the great thing about this is that people are people, right? And the more you get to know people all over the world and you work with them and you collaborate, there's so much more commonalities than differences. And getting to know them breaks those barriers as well, right? So it makes those biases a lot smaller over time. So it's great that companies are operating globally, that people are working with global communities, because those things become less relevant the more you get to know. Everything that's different and unknown is scary. And that's sometimes what drives a lot of those things.
Yeah, I actually just, if I can make a quick comment here, Rebecca, and I put on my camera so a lot of you could see what I look like, but I didn't come from a farm background. I didn't come from the industry. And I started off in animal science thinking I wanted to be a vet. And I have made a very successful career over, 2 decades in the ag space. And I think one of the thing is know yourself, right? Be true to yourself, because this industry, I would not go anywhere else. Like we all kind of filtered to different companies. Will stay into ag because it's about the people. And I think that's what our industry has, is the connection with the people, because we know that it's very belly to belly. And how I also grew is I had mentors. I mean, like Anna said, I think there wasn't a program like this before. Know yourself, know the expertise or the niche that you can find to help out the industry, and learn from people. I am still a sponge and I learn from people. And I credit a lot of my previous mentors because they took me under the wing. They took me on to the dairy side of the business, which is where I started. And I've kind of filtered across species that now I'm primarily on the swine side. But it can happen and you can learn so much. So that's what I offer. Yes, people have judgments, but I think we've come so far in people in global businesses, people that move internationally, that we're becoming more of a melting pot. That yes, you will go through adversities, but that's how you grow. Use them as opportunities, because if I come across someone where maybe we don't, aren't as personable, or maybe there are some judgments, because yes, you can tell, right? But maybe it's an opportunity to learn that, because you might find that there's other characteristics further in your career. And all of this helps so that you can get to the end point where you kind of shine in your own light. You beat to your own drum. And I think Anna knows very well that, I kind of am a little bit of an outsider and unique and quirky. And I kind of take on that because that's what's made me and successful in this career. So thank you so much for asking that question.
I miss you, Casey. I miss you.
Yep, thanks. I was going to say, Rob, any points from your standpoint on that? And maybe I'll share a little bit, because I was just say, from an international sometimes point, I get this a lot working with different people, that even Americans seem to be arrogant. And they'll say that to me, like, Americans are so arrogant. It's just like, you have to do it the American way. And then they get to know me and they're like, oh, well, she's not really a traditional American. And I think, each of us have the opportunity to change people's perceptions of your nationality, your background, and different things. So use that opportunity to even change their mindset of what they think about different cultures.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I agree with everything that's been said. Of course, I've felt it, I've seen it, I've experienced it. I think your personality and how you receive it and what you do with it, dispelling perceptions or the arrogant American or whatever the case is, I think that goes a long way into, and the person that said getting to know the other person on the other side, I fully agree with that. You find that commonality, you find that common ground, and suddenly all of those types of oppressive natures or cynicisms quickly go away, in my experience.
Well, great. Any last minute thoughts? We're a little over, but Marcos?
I think I would say what Rob said is correct. If we can find a commonality, is good. But I would say the other side, and particularly for the ones like Rebecca mentioned or Musan said, get used to it. right? It's human nature. You live it, you experience it. Don't let it affect you. And I would say one more thing, use it to your advantage. Being different sometimes is your competitive advantage. I can tell you that I've used that many times in my career, and it got me further ahead than everybody else just because I'm different. And I have no problem saying I'm a little, people will tell me, Mars, you are a weird vet. I say, yes, I am. And that's what makes me who I am, right? That's what puts me in a different position. Use that to your advantage. It's going to happen. That's fine. Move on.
This has been a great conversation. I want to thank Rob, Marcos, great insights. Thank you for everybody that's participated and gave their insights as well, and stepping up and asking questions. So thank you for another great session of Coffee and Careers in Animal Science. Just before we go, we have some exciting stuff for the students on here and young professionals. We will have mentoring sessions. Marcos has volunteered. Anna's volunteered. I think Regina's on the list at IPPE. Look out for the sign-up sheets to come visit with some of these mentors at IPPE. If you can't attend, reach out and we can hook you up with some of our mentors. And then also, if you've enjoyed the webinars, but you find that you don't have time because you're possibly in the barn as a student or working on the road as a professional, we will be launching here in February, first part of February, Coffee in the Barn. So we'll be taking insights from the different webinars for our first season and reflecting on that. So stay tuned to your local podcast application that you use for Coffee in the Barn. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Kasi,
Yes.
yeah, I'm wondering how can we register for the mentorship? Last year I was enrolled, but this year I don't know how can I get to enroll? This year's.
Well, we'll have some signups coming. We're going to be changing the Breaking New Grounds a little bit, but we can send an email with your information, like the type of job you're looking for, and we'll hook you up with somebody to reach out and talk to you directly.
All right, I would appreciate it. Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice one.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.